If you look at a map of Poland, right here in the northeast, you'll notice a strange razor-thin strip of land. That's the Vistula Spit. On one side, there's the stormy sea, on the other, a calm lagoon. The spit acts like a barrier, breaking up dangerous waves coming in from the open water. The lagoon is split between two countries. Part of it is Polish and part is Russian. But the real issue isn't the water, it's the way out. There's only one route from the lagoon to the open sea. That route is the Strait of Baltic, and it lies entirely on the Russian side. For Polish ports, that means any ship heading out to the Baltic has to pass through Russia's territorial waters. There's simply no alternative route. And here's the question, what does Poland have to do to reach the Baltic Sea on its own terms rather than on terms someone else allows? Start digging. I'm serious. The country literally reshaped the seabed, dredged out sediment, poured concrete and sank a ton of money into it, all for one narrow stretch of water that kept Poland from feeling independent when it came to access to the sea. Wait, so they really solved it with a shovel? Russia, to put it mildly, wasn't thrilled. But Poland wasn't about to stop, it went even further. Now to the most important part. Imagine you have a yard and only one gate out, and it's not yours, it's on your neighbor's land. On paper, your neighbor wrote, you can go through whenever you want. That's how Poland got the Vistula Lagoon after World War II. The water and the shore were divided, but the exit wasn't. After the war, the Kaliningrad region became part of the USSR, and with it, that key piece of land that held the only passage to the Baltic, the Strait of Baltic. Sure, there were formal agreements, Polish ships could pass freely, but ask yourself a simple question. Why would a country need permission to leave its own waters? If you need permission, it means you don't really have an exit. You only have someone else's gate. So you can technically pass, but the keys to the gate are with the neighbor. At first, it might seem like no big deal. So what if you pass through someone else's waters? But there's a catch. When everything's peaceful, it's not a problem. But when relations sour, the rules get stricter. Access to Elblag, a coastal city in Poland, becomes more conditional. More procedures, more restrictions. It's no longer as free a passage to the sea as Poland would like. And this is what drives Poland crazy, because it keeps happening. If a port survives on trade, it doesn't need proximity to the sea, it needs a guaranteed way out. Your neighbors have a straight, reliable route, so they grow. Your route is conditional, so you fall behind. For centuries, Elblag has been stuck in this weird situation. It sits in the same waters as the powerful ports of the Gulf of Gdansk. Yet it's always a step behind because it depended on someone else's door to the sea. Bottom line, they've had this problem since roughly the 16th century, and after all that time, it's pretty logical to realize it might be time to build their own passage, right? Well, yes. A few years ago, Poland finally decided that shipping in the Vistula Lagoon shouldn't be dependent on another country. They started building a canal in 2019. At first, the idea sounds almost laughably simple. Cut through the spit, and boom, you're out at sea. But the port's nearly 14 miles away by water, and that entire stretch has to be made navigable. If, after slicing through the sandbar, ships still can't reliably reach Elblag, then this new door just opens into an empty corridor. You're not merely cutting sand, you're creating a working passage between the sea and the lagoon. And that passage has to survive storms, currents, and the different water conditions on each side. Basically, once they started digging, there was no stopping it. On September 17, 2022, the canal was opened with a ceremony, and the big question was whether this route would actually work well enough for Elblag to finally operate freely and make serious money. Here's the deal. Now ships can enter the lagoon and reach Elblag directly without being forced to use the single route through the Baltic Strait. The trip is about 60 miles shorter, and yes, ships no longer need to pass through Russian waters. 60 miles off the trip and one less thing to worry about. But we miss one important detail, the lock. Looking at the map, you'd think, what's there to figure out? Water on the left, water on the right, cut through the spit, and you've got a straight channel. But if it were that simple, nobody would have built a lock in the first place. Because the main challenge here isn't connecting two bodies of water. The real problem is that these two waters aren't the same. The Baltic is an open sea. Wind and storms constantly change the water level and the currents. The lagoon is calmer, with a different rhythm for its water level and flow. And if you just cut a direct hole between them, you don't get a convenient passage. You get a spot where the water will sometimes force its way in, sometimes draw back out, and sometimes accelerate into a nasty current. But ships don't need a lottery. They need a stable, predictable crossing. That's exactly why they installed a lock. It works like an elevator between two different floors of water. A vessel enters, the gates close, and for a moment the channel becomes a sealed chamber. Inside, they can safely raise or lower the water level to the required mark. Once the levels match, the second gate opens and the ship exits as if there was never any difference at all. It's what makes the passage reliable, so the canal works every day, not only when the water feels like cooperating. Wait, so the ship literally rides an elevator? Well, almost. If the sea and the lagoon were always at the same level, there'd be no need for a lock, but they don't live by the same rules. Now and then a height difference appears between them. And in a narrow passage, a height difference means only one thing: the water will try to equalize on its own. And that equalizing turns into a current. Then a vessel isn't just moving along, it's constantly fighting the flow and correcting its heading. That's why a direct, lock-free connection would quickly become the most unpleasant stretch of the whole route. A lock fixes this problem. It seals off the section, equalizes the water level inside the chamber, and only then lets the vessel continue. As a bonus, the waters of the Gulf of Gdansk and the Vistula Lagoon don't mix directly. You can even see it in photos and videos. The water really is a different color. But what about the Strait of Baltic? There are no locks there, and ships sail through just fine. Yes, because a strait is wider and deeper. The natural conditions there make it easier for the water to absorb level changes and for ships to maneuver. Building an artificial strait of that scale by hand would be insanely expensive. So Poland did what's cheaper and more reliable. It dug a canal and let the lock do the work of dealing with the changing water levels. There's one more question. Why did they cut the canal exactly here? This wasn't some random spot on the spit or just as far as the machinery could reach. They routed it through the narrowest part of the Vistula spit, so the cut would be as short as possible. The shorter the canal, the less earth you have to dig out and the less money you spend. And it also makes the investment side easier. The environmental impact assessment is more straightforward, and there are fewer headaches with ecological compensation. In other words, they picked the place where the project could be pushed through legally and relatively calmly, in line with all the regulations. So basically, they chose the point where there was the smallest chance of getting sued. Clever. Okay, but here's the big question. What did it actually cost? At first, the project was estimated at about 190 million euros. But as usual, things didn't go to plan, and in the end, it came out to roughly 420 million euros. And people naturally started asking, what are we paying that kind of money for if the canal looks like a narrow, shallow cut in the ground? But the canal was never meant to handle everything. It's designed for relatively small vessels, around 330 feet long, about 66 feet wide, with a draft of roughly 13 to 15 feet. So no, it's not a new Suez or Panama. It's not about megaships. It's about making one specific route work reliably. And that's why the criticism is inevitable. When you spend hundreds of millions of euros and don't get a super canal for the whole world, people will always ask, was it worth it? You can talk about the canal however you want, politics, money, all that, but that isn't what people are really talking about. They actually point to one thing. Water can be extremely dangerous. With a bridge, it's simple. If it cracks, you fix it. With water, it doesn't work that way. If you miscalculate, there's almost no way back. So who is objecting anyway? Russia was against it. People in Poland and across Europe were against it too, because the lagoon bottom isn't just a bit of sand. Down there sits a buildup of phosphorus, as marine biologist Dr. Agata Blaszczyk warned. Phosphorus comes from wastewater, livestock farming, and fertilizers. As long as it stays on the bottom, it's like the problem doesn't exist. But once you start stirring up sediments and changing the currents, everything changes. That chemistry from the bottom enters the water much more easily, and then it starts playing by its own rules. It can spread through the lagoon and into nearby parts of the sea. That's exactly why people fear cyanobacteria. In the lagoon, they're considered more toxic than in the open Baltic. Could this trigger a new disaster? Well, you and I know how governments deal with problems like this. They kind of exist and kind of don't. You know what I mean. But let's get back to the canal. Can we call it perfect? So far, there haven't been any problems. It even produced a side effect. When you dig a passage, you're left with a massive amount of excavated soil. And then the question's simple. What do you do with it? Hauling it away is expensive. Stockpiling it along the shore isn't allowed. So the Poles chose a practical solution. They started using that material to build an artificial island. Wait, so they dug the canal and used the dugout soil to make an island? Exactly. And it's not some tiny mound. It's about 445 acres. And that's not all. To make the route to Elblag truly functional, they'll dredge the lagoon and the riverbed, which means even more material will keep coming. The island becomes the place where it can be added little by little over time. You could call it a zero-waste approach. But what is this island, and why do they need it? A new land area will rise about 10 feet above sea level. Tourists won't be allowed there as it's neither a park nor a resort, but rather a compensation for the damage caused by construction. A restricted area where plants should take root and birds such as grebes and swans will settle. What's especially important is that the island has already survived winters, including ones with icy deposits. Since the land withstood it, this plan is working. But the criticism of the project continues, with the same question being asked, was this new canal really necessary? Some say the construction is pointless both economically and in terms of safety. They claim that Poland had no real reason to get involved in this project. It was a purely political decision. Moreover, there are more practical trading points. Just 37 miles from Elblag is Gdansk, a massive port with a container terminal capable of handling even the largest ships. You load the containers, hop on a fast highway, and within an hour, the cargo is already in Elblag. Essentially, Poland already has access to the sea. If it's just an hour drive to Gdansk, why dig a canal that costs hundreds of millions of euros? President Duda dismissed all the criticisms. He said something along the lines of this: the real issue isn't whether the largest ships will pass through the canal. There are other ports for that. The key point is something different. This route needs to be opened symbolically so that Poland isn't forced to ask for permission from a country with which it doesn't have the best relations. Of course, there's some logic in that, but the project is now on the verge of failure because the ships simply can't enter the lagoon. According to the charts, the channel is about 16 feet deep, so ships with a draft of up to roughly 15 feet can make it through. Sounds fine, but that's only the first part of the route. After that, you hit the lagoon. And the lagoon is shallow. On average, it's only 7 to 10 feet deep, with a maximum of about 17 feet. So a vessel can pass the canal without trouble and then suddenly run aground once it's inside. It's a paradox. They built the canal, but large cargo ships still don't really use it. In practice, it's mostly small boats and yachts. So they built the gate, and on the other side, there's just a puddle? Pretty much. People even discussed cases where opening an unfinished waterway could be genuinely dangerous. You clear the canal and then risk getting stuck for good. Officially, construction was completed in September 2022, but in its current form, the route serves more as a tourist attraction than a real transport corridor. The numbers make it even clearer. From January to December 2024, only 31 cargo ships went through the canal. Fishermen barely use it too, about 32 vessels over the same period. The real main users are leisure boats, 1,466 passages. Poland also knew the canal, as it stands, doesn't quite measure up. The cut through the spit is there, that part isn't the issue. The real problem is that the lagoon still needs to be dredged deeper, and someone has to pay for it. The biggest bottleneck turned out not to be the lagoon at all, but one small stretch. It's a final section of the Elblag River, only about 2,950 feet long. It needs to be dredged so larger ships can reach the port, but the project got bogged down in disputes and bureaucracy. Only in January 2024 did Donald Tusk's new government say, okay, we'll take this on and finish it. The plan is a navigable route with a depth of about 16 feet along the entire length, with the width kept between roughly 66 and 197 feet. That would allow vessels up to about 328 feet long with a draft of around 15 feet to enter the port, figures that have already been stated officially. And to actually make it happen, Poland ordered a dedicated vessel from a Finnish company built specifically for dredging work in the lagoon. It happened in February 2022 and cost $28 million. The vessel was built at the Finnish shipyard Taioveen in Uusikaupunki so it could keep a 0.8-mile canal at a steady depth of at least 16 feet. The problem is that the bottom there is constantly shifting. Storms, silt washed in by rivers, and non-stop sediment movement quickly eat away at the depth. If you don't maintain it, ships start scraping bottom again. Without continuous dredging, the canal simply stops being navigable. digging it out isn't enough. You have to keep vacuuming it. And that vacuum was launched on September 19, 2023. It's a dredger named Ursa. It's a rugged, wear-resistant steel machine designed specifically for the conditions of the Vistula Lagoon. It sucks up sand, silt, and gravel from the bottom like a giant underwater vacuum, pumps it into its hold, and then transfers it onward. The material is then sent through a pipeline for land reclamation, in this case to an artificial island in the lagoon, so the bottom gets cleaned and the dredged soil is put to use right away. A fun detail, for Tyovine, this was their first dredger of this kind. Finland's market is small, so they turn to the Netherlands for help, where ships like this are built all the time. And now something crucial depends on this machine, whether the canal finally becomes stable instead of a temporary fix. And of course Russia objected, and still does. The argument is that if a new canal appears, NATO warships could, at least in theory, pass through the Vistula Spit and reach the Vistula area, sidestepping Russia's military facilities in Baltic. That was seen as a direct threat to Kaliningrad and to Russia more broadly. Some suspicions were also raised in Poland at the time. Some argued that military infrastructure could be set up in Elblag. The former commander of the Polish army, General Miroslaw Rozansky, who had criticized the government, even hinted that this was the true reason behind the project. However, he also pointed out the counterargument. The possibility of establishing a full-fledged base there was weak, primarily because the Vistula Lagoon is shallow. Additionally, there was another concern. Keeping a military facility so close to Baltic would mean constantly sitting on a powder keg. But if we go back in time, the situation for Elblag looks very different. The port used to develop with a focus on the border, which effectively split the bay in half. Now that logic is being broken. The canal is becoming both a symbol of regional growth and an unexpected tourist destination on the Vistula Spit. The economy here also plays a role. The region faces high unemployment, about 16%, while the voivodeship is at 10%, and the national average is around 6%. For the locals, the canal is a chance. Before the canal was open, the port in Elblag could handle about 200,000 tons of cargo a year. Now the plans sound almost like a fantasy. The current authorities expect that by 2045, the capacity will rise to 22 million tons. That's almost the same as Gdynia's. In conclusion, amid fears, hopes, and figures, this canal is much more than just a waterway now. You owe me a like. See you later.